The Grim Drive podcast explores mental health through the lens of professional sports and athletes. Pro athletes come forward more and more with stories about their mental health journey, what they have endured, and how they managed to push through, reflecting a mental health stigma that continues to be reduced. Pro athletes also leverage mindset to achieve peak performance, as well as representing and often driving elements of popular culture through the use of social media, technology, and personal branding. This places athletes front and center as role models for people of all ages, giving them a platform to reach many and deliver important information, including information about mental health. Welcome to the Grim Drive podcast, where we explore mental health through the lens of professional sports and athletes. My name is Jotham Busfield. I'm here with John Cuna. Today we're going to be discussing Ben Simmons. We're going to try to go light. No, we're not. We're Celtics fans, so we're going to be honest here. So we'll start with what's going on with Ben Simmons. I mean, he's been on the Sixers now for 5 years roughly. I didn't look it up, but
2017, I think he was.
Yeah, roughly. Yeah, 2000. So maybe he's going into his fifth year. Fifth year.
Yep.
And he's someone who, I think he was the first pick in the NBA draft, and then, coming out of, I think it was LSU, he did like the whole one and done documentary and all that stuff. He's someone who, that shooting was not his strength. I think he's a 6'11" point guard, right? Who's like one of the best defenders in all of basketball.
Yeah.
So that ability to be sort of run and gun, distribute, and then play defense, and obviously be 6'11", or 6'10", are his main attributes, his main strengths. I think they thought with some time the shooting would come along.
Yeah.
But we're at a point now where I think it hasn't, and we're not fully equipped with all the information here. We don't know what his off-season regimen is. We don't know how hard he's working. We don't know any of that stuff.
No.
I mean, I think there's been reports that he's not as hardworking as other people, or is not willing to focus on the things that he needs to improve as much as other people are. But we don't know that. I mean, It could be the case, might not be. I know I certainly see enough videos of him putting videos of himself out there draining step back Jays over 5'5" people in a gym somewhere in Milwaukee. But so maybe he is putting in the work. I don't know. But lately, what's happened is that at the end of last year's playoffs, he really got exploited in the playoffs. I think if you're a run and gun point guard, and, that works during the regular season when you're playing a bunch of like shitty teams, excuse my language, but like teams that half the league is not going to be competing on a night-to-night basis.
Right.
And so that's part of it. You get in the playoffs, you're playing a very good team for 7 games in a row at most. The other thing is in the playoffs, things slow down a little bit. It becomes much more of a half-court game in basketball than it does a full-court game. And so if your strength is pace and run and gun, that kind of goes away, or at least gets negated a bit in the playoffs. And so you have to be able to play a half-court offense, and that's just not his strength. And he's a point guard where you want your point guard to be able to take free throws at the end of the game, because that's a huge asset.
Yep.
And he can't. He's the opposite. He's a horrible free throw shooter, and they just totally exploited that. They were like fouling him intentionally and things like that, and it just led to this scenario where he was clearly hesitant and passive, and not passive like a point guard passes, but passive like avoidant, right? In the game, and they just couldn't play him. I mean, I think in the fourth quarter in that last playoff series, I don't think he played at all really, or Doc Rivers was limiting his minutes, and it affected the team. And I think in a city like Philly, with that fan base, it was clearly, even if Ben Simmons did not demand out, I don't know that it would have been doable for him. Maybe like the athletes with the most mental toughness could handle. I think Embiid could, right? He's someone who would probably just flip off the entire Philly fan base and just keep rolling.
He's always been pretty vocal.
He's got that skill to be able to kind of tune that out a little bit. But Ben Simmons is someone who is in one of the worst situations based on that fan base, and I think he's the last person that wants that. So we're going to get into that a little bit. Maybe just hear your general thoughts about Ben Simmons and the situation he finds himself in, where he's demanding a trade.
I think it's about time. I think it's probably been a long time coming for him. I think there was a lot of expectations put on him coming out, right? Like he was like the guy, right? Like this was the guy that was going to do that, and they've put in 5 years to try to get that, and they haven't. There's always just been more and more disappointment.
Yeah, he's never gone past like the ceiling that he first reached.
That he kind of reached, and I think he, I don't think he, and again, we can't speculate on his work ethic, and we talked about this in our previous episode, but like all the stuff and the work that goes on behind the scenes that we don't see, I'm sure he's putting that stuff in. There's been a couple of things that came up through interactions or quotes from different people around him, like Doc Rivers or Embiid, that does sort of start to shine a little bit of light on inside perspective of like what's going on.
Like in terms of in his mindset?
Yeah, like his mindset. I think, as a fan watching him, there are certainly plays or things where you're sort of like left scratching your head, right? Like that Game 7 pass, right? You're just like, what was that about, right? And that was one of the things that both Embiid and Doc Rivers talk about, and I'll get to that in just a second. But there's lots of things like that come up. Like there's situations where he looks like afraid, uncomfortable. We specifically are outside the perimeter. It seems like he just like refuses to do that, and just different things that come up, like with me, with my perspective of like mental fitness and those types of like concepts. I see a lot of things that I think he could improve upon, just from a player standpoint. I don't know how much stuff is going on behind the scenes, but after that Game 7 loss, some of the stuff that Doc was saying when they got asked, like, do you think Ben Simmons will ever be like a top point guard in the league? And his answer was like, I don't know how to answer that. That's not really a great response from your head coach.
When you said that had a huge impact on his trade value too, which I would imagine the GM was pissed after that, because you can't make comments like that, because if you're going to trade him or he demands a trade, you just submarined his value from within.
Big time, right. And I think it was a big shift. I think Doc really tried, and I widely respect Doc Rivers, obviously, but he, for the whole season was really working to try to like, he's a member of this team. He had been really floating him and really been talking him up in the press and like, really defending him. And then Game 7 happens, and I think it just kind of like, I think for Doc, it was sort of like the breaking point for him of like, I don't really know what else I can do. And for me, reading between the lines, and again, this is all speculation, but it speaks to like how much work Doc had probably been doing behind the scenes to try to get this guy in a better headspace. And then the blunder of Game 7, and it was like, I don't know what to tell you anymore, right? Like, I've been defending this guy this whole season, and now he's just kind of like really flopped, and I don't really know what to tell you.
Yeah, it's interesting because like we definitely try not to speculate. I would say we do a pretty good job of not speculating when we don't have information about certain things, right? Like off-season stuff, like we can't know where he is. We don't know how much time he's putting in, so that stuff we're not informed enough to speculate.
Right.
But we can, I would say, assess body language, right? That's something that we do in our professional work. I think, I don't know what the cliched expression is, but like 90% of communication is nonverbal, that kind of thing. We're big believers in that. I mean, I think, as licensed therapists for a living, like we pay, and this is why, having sessions when people weren't wearing masks is kind of a no-no, right? You either do Zoom or you sit far enough apart to like be able to see the person without a mask.
Right.
Because you have to be able to see their face, like their expressions, their demeanor, their posture. That kind of stuff plays a huge role in communication, and it speaks volumes. And I've watched Ben Simmons play for almost 5 years now, and his nonverbal communication is that of someone who doesn't give a shit about basketball, to me. Now, I don't know if that's the case. I mean, he could be. Sometimes we communicate things we don't actually mean, verbal or nonverbal. So it could be the case, right? But from what I've gathered from watching him play, I don't think he's someone that if he could do something else and make this much money, I think he'd be doing something else. That's my assessment of him. And that's okay. Not everyone is like built to be or born to be like someone who loves being a professional athlete. I think I'm actually surprised more people aren't bogged down by we've talked a lot about professional athletes and just the stressful aspect of that existence, of fame, of having a ton of money, people coming out of the woodwork, there's a lot of different things. And I think on the surface, most fans are like, yeah, you should be happy and you should be healthy.
Making millions of dollars. What do you have to complain about?
Exactly. So I'm not going to fault Ben Simmons. Like if he's not the most passionate person about basketball, totally fine. But it does come through in his play in terms of how he looks on the court. It doesn't look like he's a very happy person. And maybe that's basketball, maybe it's other things. So I think that's something that stood out to me. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah, definitely. And for me, again, that speaks to someone who has a hard time like either compartmentalizing the game of basketball, that I imagine he started playing because he was deeply passionate about it, and somewhere along the lines
maybe not,
right?
Yeah.
Maybe it was like, you're super freak
you're tall and
you're athletic. You're going to play basketball.
That happens.
I don't know, right? And that could be a piece of it too. But the stuff that comes along with fame isn't really. I think to your point, it's dismissed as like, you're making millions of dollars. What do you possibly have to complain about? Well, you're getting people you've never met before calling you trash and terrible constantly on a constant basis. You're meeting people are calling, catcalling you when you're just trying to walk around, go to deals, give me this signature. Like it's incredibly stressful to be put in that type of position, and especially in a city like Philly where they take their sports very, very seriously. It's very similar to Boston, right? Like if you don't perform in Boston, you get ridiculed by your own fans. It's very similar in Philly. And I think that I think it wears on people, and I think that's why it speaks to the importance of working on keeping yourself protected from that deterioration. I do, unfortunately, think that for a lot of athletes that happens. Like, it's not necessarily the physical component that wears you down in pro sports. I think it's the mental one that wears you down of just like, why do I continuously put myself in this position? Like, yeah, sure, I'm making millions of dollars, but there's something to be said when that isn't enough.
Yeah, right? Who am I doing this for? That has to kick in when you're getting paid, but like everyone else around you seems to hate you, or like, at least I know it's sports hate, but like he's still a person, right? That you're going to feel that. Like everyone's human, they're going to feel that. That's got to weigh on you after a while. And the other thing is like, Jackie McMullen, who we've talked about multiple times on this podcast, has spoken to her perception. Again, this is just her opinion. I agree with it, but her perception that he's got this perfectionistic streak and an unwillingness to fail or look bad, and that's what prevents him from taking threes. Like, he could be, her hypothesis is that he could be a 33% three-point shooter, which isn't bad. I mean, like, especially if he's doing all those other things, you almost need to do that to keep the defense honest, because if you're going to hit at least 1 out of 3, then that's enough to build off of, right? You want him closer to like 38 to 40. And ideally over 40, but if he's at least in the low 30s, like, that's workable. But he refuses to shoot because if he can't shoot enough that he'll feel good about himself at that percentage, he just refuses to. And that does line up with what kind of seems to happen because he refuses to do it. And it's interesting. This kind of reminds me of she's spoken about Dwight Howard in the past doing the same thing, where in practice he'll just sit there and nail jumpers and then admit that he won't do it in the game because he's afraid of missing and what that means. Like, to me, it shows you that even people at this highest level have these types of fears, and those fears block them from being able to like actually follow through and put themselves in a position to fail and get better. So that's something. What do you think about that from Jackie Mack? Yeah,
I mean, like, loss aversion is kind of the thing that comes up, right? Like, you're more afraid of losing or looking bad than you are of not of being successful.
What's the irony of that?
For what?
For loss aversion and what that does.
Oh, then you end up just playing worse anyway.
That's what I mean. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly. Like, you're afraid of taking the shots, you won't take the shot, and then you never get yourself in a position where you can be successful and build off of confidence, when really is just, it doesn't matter if you shoot or not. You just want to be shooting.
Exactly.
And you're not going to get any better if you don't put yourself in positions to practice. And the more that you feed into that loss aversion, the worse it gets. And I think we've seen a little bit of that from Ben in terms of like the perimeter shooting and things like that. And I also think that it ties into the amount of pressure that he probably either puts on himself or is put on him from outside perspectives, both the team, like, these are our expectations of what, like, the coach is telling me, you need to be doing this. That's a big weight to hold. We spoke about this before in a previous podcast, but like, he's probably been one of the best players, like, wherever he's been for his whole life. And now he's got like the weight of the world on top of him, and that's a lot to shoulder. And every missed 3 is like you suck, you're not doing it, you're not living up to the expectations, right? And again, speculating of like what his mental feedback might be, but that's kind of how it looks from a fan perspective of like, if I just don't put myself in that position, no one can talk shit about me or no one can tell me that I'm bad. But in reality, now it's become the conversation he's been fearing of like, why isn't he taking the threes? He's not taking enough threes. So to your point, like, the irony of it is that he's just now put himself in the position that he's probably been fearing from not taking those shots.
Absolutely. It's almost like the need to look good, or maybe more accurately, like the need to not look bad, is his priority over playing as best as he can, right? Or getting better or improving or that kind of thing. His priorities are out of whack. And sometimes that comes from just the flack you've gotten from other people and the social dynamic and the fear that comes from that. So a lot of times I think it comes from insecurity. I think that's what drives it most of the time. The biggest example of this, in my opinion, that I've ever come across, particularly in basketball, is you ever heard of Rick Barry, the whole underhand foul shooting thing? You ever seen this?
No.
It's fascinating. So Rick Barry is someone who played, he played in the NBA. He had 2 sons that both played in the NBA. I think Brent Barry, who won a slam dunk competition, and someone else. And Rick Barry, when he played in the NBA, he was famous for shooting free throws underhand. And he perfected this to the point where he can teach anyone. He's gone on record as saying, I can teach anyone to shoot over 80% shooting free throws. And because something about shooting it underhand is a lot easier in terms of the consistency and also the I guess the strength at which it hits the rim, so it's a little more forgiving because it falls more gently on the rim when you shoot it that way.
Yeah.
So you're more likely to get a bounce and that kind of thing.
Cool.
And it's also easier to kind of keep it straight. So anyway, Rick Barry has gone on the record talking about how he could turn anyone into an 80-85% free throw shooter, if not better, if they're willing to shoot like this. But no one's willing to shoot like that. Yeah. And it fascinates me because you'd think, if you're in the NBA, right, this is like Alex Caruso times 10, I think, like, to the next level, where if you knew that you could shoot 90%, but you had to shoot underhand, and that would make the difference of staying in the NBA and not, I bet you anything most would still not do it. And they don't right now.
Yeah.
That to me fascinates me because it means their ego and the need to look good and not want to look stupid or goofy shooting underhand comes above their desire to actually get better and stay in the league.
Yeah.
That fascinates me because if it was me, I would just shoot underhand. Like, I don't care. Like, go ahead, make fun of me all you want. Like, if I'm shooting 93% and I'm looking stupid, I'd rather do that than look, a little bit more manly, but shoot 49%. Like, that makes no sense to me.
Yeah, and I'm curious too because like the difference of like you or I thinking about putting ourselves in the position, we don't have the outside influence of it, right? So from sitting here, it's like, of course, if I can be a 90% free throw shooter, like, yeah, I'm gonna shoot there and I'm gonna shoot underhand and like go screw, right? I don't know what the impact of hearing like 10, 15 million people telling me that I look stupid or that that's terrible or that I'm an awful person or like whatever the trolls that come out of the woodwork for shooting like that, like what the impact of that, and then on like a sustainable level. And then if you're not doing any type of work, and again, this is speculation of like if he's doing any mental training or not, but like how that tidal wave of negativity comes for when you have like such a huge platform of people that are coming at you.
But they're dealing with it anyway. That's the thing. Like,
I agree.
I've seen, you remember Shaq used to have all kinds of different ways to try to get better at shooting a free throw. He'd like hop on one leg and like, do, like all kinds of things. And so he clearly didn't care about looking goofy, but refused to do that. I think, so I don't know if it's that they convinced themselves that one different way of shooting and trying it out looks less goofy than that underhanded version. I don't know.
No idea.
But that to me is like the ultimate example of like, I think a lot of times ego will get in the way and fear will get in the way, and that dictates decision making over what's actually in the best interest.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that like the concept of like hero ball is another example where that comes up, where players will like take a bad shot to be the hero versus the smarter play to win the game.
Particularly in the G League.
Particularly in the G League, right? And then there's even been examples of that on the Celtics. There was I forget the game last year where Tatum took like a ridiculous 3-point shot. Luckily it went in, but there was a better play, right? I guess you can argue like it went the way that it should have, but it was like a contested 3 double team. The guy was I forget who was open underneath. I think it might have been Smart who made the cut, but it was like wide open layup to like for the win with the time. But like that concept of hero ball is like a big one in there too, and I wonder if that circles into Simmons not wanting to take those big shots because of that. So
absolutely. So I think we'll end our rant on Ben Simmons for now. Maybe we'll revisit that depending on, I did hear rumors that the latest rumors that he'll get traded within the week, possibly to Houston. So we'll see what happens with that.
Yep.
So I want to thank everyone for listening to this episode of the Grim Drive podcast for our discussion about Ben Simmons. We will put all the links in the show notes and on our website at grimdrive.com, and we will see you next week.
Thanks, everyone.